Hello, my world history students. I hope you are all staying safe and healthy and getting your packets done, getting them in on time. So here we are back with another video. We are still continuing with Cold War topics. The last video I went through was the Vietnam War, and today we're going to look at more of what was going on in America throughout the Cold War. So just a quick refresher for you. Remember, the Cold War is between the two superpowers of the United States and the Soviet Union, a battle between a capitalist democratic ideology and a communist ideology, Soviet ideology. All right, so first, just want to show you this political cartoon because I think it's very relevant, even possibly in what's going on right now with COVID, the coronavirus. So you can see here that you have a man labeled as hysteria, which means fear, climbing up a ladder to put out this fire. Okay, and what you can notice is this fire is the Statue of Liberty, right? Her torch. And so some of the questions they're asking here is, what we're going to figure out more how this relates to the Cold War. But what I wanted to point out is that, briefly, generally, when we are going through panic as a nation or we fear something as a nation, we often see that a lot of our civil rights or our civil liberties are threatened. Okay, and you can see this right now where it's this constant debate, even going on with Corona. Okay, is it right that we are being told to stay home and that businesses are being told to shut down? A lot of people think that's infringing their civil rights and their liberties, and that's why you're seeing all of these protests. If you've been following the news, you see all these protests going on, basically protesting the government shutdown. Okay, so it's similar even in terms of the Cold War. People were so afraid of the spread of communism that the government was taking actions that many thought went against, the Constitution, our civil rights, and our civil liberties. There's Bill of Rights. Okay, so we'll look at how that played out during the Cold War. So I'll go ahead and get started. All right, first we are going to start with McCarthyism, who is a very good example of this almost breaking the rules a little bit as a government official in a response to fear. Okay, so McCarthyism, all right, was named after this senator here named Joseph McCarthy. All right, and he was very, very, very anti-communist. All right, and that's kind of how he rose to power, was rallying people towards him under this anti-communist banner. Okay, so McCarthyism was false accusations of being a communist and being un-American towards political adversaries. So that's political rivals, people that he considered his rivals, competition, people he didn't like. And oftentimes he would accuse these people of being communists when really there was little to no evidence. Okay, but the consequences of that were very real. And this is part of that Red Scare. Again, the Red Scare is the fear of communism. All right, so his rise to power, basically, he claimed that he had this secret list of people that were within the government that he knew were communists. All right, but again, looking back on it, we know he really had no evidence at all against these people. So these were just accusations, and oftentimes people would lose their jobs over these accusations. They'd be blacklisted, which I know is probably another term that you've heard before, especially if you took American history. Okay, so no one stood up to him because of the fear that if you stood up to him, then he would just accuse you of being a communist, as being un-American, and then you could lose your job, be kind of an outcast of society, so on and so forth. His targets were often too weak to fight back. That's another reason why no one really stood up to him. But eventually McCarthy is going to bite off too big of a piece for him to chew, essentially, when he tries to take on the army. Okay, and as we know, it's never a good idea to take on the American military, even if you are an American politician. And so there's George Marshall. That's the guy he's eventually going to try and accuse of being a communist, and it's going to backfire on him, but we'll get more into that here later. All right. I'm not going to watch that video.
The Attorney General's list does not and never has listed the ACLU as subversive, nor does the FBI or any other federal government agency. And the American Civil Liberties Union holds in its files letters of commendation from President Truman, President Eisenhower, and General MacArthur. Earlier, the senator asked, Upon what meat does this our Caesar feed? Had he looked 3 lines earlier in Shakespeare's Caesar, he would have found this line, which is not altogether inappropriate. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves. No one familiar with the history of this country can deny that congressional committees are useful. It is necessary to investigate before legislating, but the line between investigating and persecuting is a very fine one, and the junior senator from Wisconsin has stepped over it repeatedly. We must not confuse dissent with disloyalty. We must remember always that accusation is not proof, and that conviction depends upon evidence and due process of law. We will not walk in fear one of another. We will not be driven by fear into an age of unreason if we dig deep in our history and our doctrine, and remember that we are not descended from fearful men, not from men who feared to write, to associate, to speak, and to defend the causes that were for the moment unpopular. This is no time for men who oppose Senator McCarthy's methods to keep silent, or for those who approve. We can deny our heritage and our history, but we cannot escape responsibility for the results. We proclaim ourselves, indeed, as we are, the defenders of freedom wherever it continues to exist in the world, but we cannot defend freedom abroad by deserting it at home. The actions of the junior senator from Wisconsin have caused alarm and dismay amongst our allies abroad, and given considerable comfort to our enemies. And whose fault is that? Not really his. He didn't create this situation of fear. He merely exploited it, and rather successfully. Cassius was right. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves. Good night, and good luck.
For the sake of time. All right. So, some other important terms to know, and this really describes American foreign policy throughout this whole Cold War period, and a lot of this stuff still is a part of American foreign policy to this day in 2020. All right, one of those is deterrence. Okay, so this first term you see here. The whole idea of deterrence is that you should make your military so strong and so big that no one will dare to mess with you. Okay, and that's basically the policy that the United States is going to pick up during the Cold War, and we still practice that today, right? We spend more on our military than the next top 10 countries combined, right? So deterrence is still very real in 2020. Brinkmanship, this was the policy of, going to the verge of war in order to get what you want, right? So you completely skipped treaties and diplomatic meetings. It just went straight to the threat of nuclear war, all right? So a very aggressive stance and approach in foreign policy, and that's what we practiced, and the Soviet Union, during the Cold War. All right. Another important one, ICBMs. As you can see in the video right here, that's an ICBM. We still have those today. They've obviously improved throughout time. But basically, this is a new way in the Cold War to launch nuclear weapons. Okay, and so this also caused a lot of panic and hysteria amongst the American public and really throughout the world, because now this is, nuclear warheads can now be launched from the safety of your home country and can go over oceans very far distance to strike its target, right? So it's no longer like you have to fly a plane into enemy airspace and then drop a nuclear bomb. You can now fire it from the safety of your own country. And there was really no defense system against these yet at this time, so it was a very scary thing. Sputnik, which I think we've talked about before, that was the first Soviets created, which then, sorry, turn that off.